Well, amidst reports that China plans to build a major dam on the Brahmaputra, India on Thursday said that it carefully monitors all developments relating to the river and that it intends to remain engaged with China on the issue of trans-border rivers to safeguard its interests. The Brahmaputra river, known as the Yarlung Tsangpo in China, originates from Tibet and flows into Arunachal Pradesh and Assam. At a media briefing earlier this week, External Affairs Ministry spokesperson Anurag Srivastav said that the Chinese side has conveyed to India on several occasions that it was only undertaking run-of-the-river hydropower projects which do not involve diversion of the waters of the Brahmaputra. Noting that issues relating to trans-border rivers are discussed with China under the ambit of an institutionalized expert-level mechanism which was established in 2006 as well as through diplomatic channels, the MEA spokesperson said we intend to remain engaged with China on the issues of trans-border rivers to safeguard our interests. In Beijing, the Chinese Foreign Ministry said that there is no need to have any anxiety over the project and that China will continue to have good communication with lower riparian states, India and Bangladesh. In this edition of The Big Picture, we will analyze China's moves on the Brahmaputra. Joining me on the program today are Vivek Karju, former ambassador, Major General Dhruv C. Katoch, retired Director, India Foundation, and Jayadev Ranade, security and intelligence expert. Thank you to all my guests for joining me on this edition of The Big Picture. Ambassador, let me begin the program with you first. Of late we've seen a lot of, several media reports about river diplomacy and what China could possibly do as far as rivers are concerned, because several of the major rivers originate from China and this is something that we are concerned about.
No, our concern is natural, but let me try to expand this a little. India is both an upper riparian in cases of some rivers and a lower riparian in cases of others. It would be fair for me to say that our record as an upper riparian state is very good. For instance, we have the Indus Waters Treaty with Pakistan, and whatever Pakistan may say, I can say with a sense of authority, because I've dealt with these issues while I was working, that India acts with scrupulous responsibility in adhering to the provisions of that treaty, and that treaty is a very generous treaty. In fact, there are voices within Jammu and Kashmir which believe that India was much too generous with the waters of the rivers. So if we are responsible, if we are a responsible state in respect of rivers where we are upper riparians, we can expect that states that are upper riparians and where we are lower riparians, that those states will act responsibly. The Chinese have said that they are acting responsibly and there are these mechanisms, but the question is, given China's aggressive approaches, will they maintain what they are saying? The Chinese record, not only with us, but when in Southeast Asia too, where they are upper riparians, has filled many countries with anxiety. So therefore, our cautions and the cautions that are being voiced generally, and especially in the Northeast, have to be taken seriously. Of course, the government is correct in saying that they are monitoring the situation. But the question is monitoring enough? Or do we now need to think of mechanisms where we can secure our interests more effectively and hence the cause of anxiety may be removed?
Mr. Ranade, let me bring you in here. Building on the points that the ambassador has just made, is monitoring enough? What more needs to be done? Looking at China's, past track record, clearly we cannot take some of their statements on face value. So, what should our option be?
Frank, if I may just open by saying that it's not a question of taking some of their statements at face value. I think most of their statements, if not all, have to be really probed to try and determine whether they are close to the truth or not. As far as the river systems are concerned, we have two examples before us. One is the Brahmaputra, which we are discussing right now. The other is the Mekong, which is the lifeline for, in fact, Thailand and the rivers and the countries in Southeast Asia, Vietnam, etc. And there, China has been quite, if I may say, has used brute strength in pushing through its policies. It has built a series of dams on the upper Mekong, ignoring the protests from the countries in the lower riparian countries. And it has proceeded with what it wants to do. If we look at Brahmaputra again, this planning, in fact, for diverting the Brahmaputra, and that's what it is, frankly, started around 1993. And in various stages, it has been discussed. Papers have been presented, including to the Chinese president at that time, Jiang Zemin, etc. In 2002 or 2003, a special office was created under the Premier of China to monitor the progress of this dam. In 2005, details of the dam were put out by a former Chinese military officer in a book. And that was quite alarming at that point in time. I think Government of India also voiced its concerns at the developments. And I remember in end of 2003, the Chinese minister, a spokesman, he said that there are no such plans for dams. But contrast that with the dam built at Changmu, again in the upper reaches of the Brahmaputra. And when India asked the Chinese, they denied that there was any dam being built. And I believe at the next meeting, our officers showed them a satellite image of the dam, which is when they said, oh yes, but that's a run of the river. Firstly, this particular project, I think, is something that should cause us a lot of concern, not only us, Bhutan and Bangladesh too. It talks about somewhere near, I think, almost 200 billion cubic meters of water being siphoned out of the Brahmaputra, preparatory to the diversion of the river. And the plan is to have this hydropower project, which is larger than the Three Gorges, which is the world's largest today, at the Great Bend. That is the point where the Brahmaputra turns southward and comes into India. It's also the highest drop of the Brahmaputra, almost over 2,500 meters. So they expect to be able to generate enough power. And another point, which I think needs mention, is that they intend to do the excavation for this dam using small nuclear explosives with its consequent impact. So for us, there is not only an environmental concern, because if the Brahmaputra gets diverted, or even if this major project comes up, it will mean that the water flow in the Brahmaputra will be drastically reduced, causing immense silting in Bangladesh. For us, of course, there'll be twofold security implications. One, the shortage of water, and second, the influx of refugees from Bangladesh. Third, if they do use nuclear explosions, no matter whether they're small or big, there is bound to be some kind of a radioactive fallout. And that will affect us again, including our crop production, etc. Because let's not forget that the area there in the northeast, where the Brahmaputra comes through, is also very fertile land and grows a lot of rice. So for us, there are a number of issues at stake. I think apart from the fact that a number of people living in the Indo-Gangetic Plain will be affected. So I would, to get to your point, I would feel that actually what we need to do now is to, frankly speaking, raise the level of discussion with China and also increase the pressure on China by talking to other countries which are affected, including the Southeast Asian lower riparian countries, and making it an international issue. Because denial of water is something which will harm the very existence of millions of people in the region.
Absolutely. So General, let me bring you in here. Let's build upon the points that were raised by Mr. Ranade, and take them forward. Now, trying to get international consensus on an issue like this, of course, water is a highly sensitive issue. So we may see a lot of support from, our neighboring countries and those countries that have been affected or impacted as a result of what China plans to do. But how far are these countries willing to go to take on China?
Frank, I think when we are looking at the countries concerned, I don't think they will actually go very far in taking on China at the present moment. And the reasons are two. As of now, the capacity of China to steal the water of the Yarlung Tsangpo or the Brahmaputra River is limited. In fact, they have no capacity as of now, but that is the capacity which Mr. Ranade said they would like to develop, for which they would even use nuclear facilities, trying to blast those tunnels using nuclear devices. Because without that, I don't think you can actually go through and tunnel your way out. You have, when you're looking at the Great Bend in the Yarlung Tsangpo, behind that is a complete range of mountains. So what they will have to do is to, actually tunnel their way through that entire mountain range. But China has been known to do their tunneling, and they've been so to that extent. I do not think that it will be an impossible task. I just think for the moment it is a difficult task, and as of now, they cannot do it. I believe by 2050 they will have the capacity to have actually done it. In which case, the entire waters of this portion of the Brahmaputra, because the Brahmaputra is not simply the Yarlung Tsangpo. We have got the Lohit, we have got the Dibang. Then, of course, we have the Siang, which is the Yarlung Tsangpo. Then we have got you keep going up, then you've got the Kameng River and the Subansiri. And then a very great part of the precipitation which take place in this part of the Himalayas is on the southern slopes. Not on the northern slopes of the Himalayas, it's on the southern slopes. So we find that water-wise, actually the impact is not going to be that much as what has been stated. The impact is going to be far more serious on the ecology and on the limited quality of water which comes out, because if the silting comes out, with the large quantity of silt which is coming out, it will impact on the complete availability of water in the Brahmaputra. So it is not simply a reduction in the water, it is also polluting the water which is coming out and creating a huge environmental damage in this particular area. And I think the people who are living in the Siang Valley, they are the ones which are going to be affected by far the most. And correspondingly, everybody downstream will keep getting impacted. So right. The question is, what can we do? I think this sensitizing the downstream population, it is not just Bangladesh. We've got to sensitize the entire ASEAN region. Because we cannot simply talk about the Brahmaputra River. We've got to talk about the complete river systems, and China will never, ever keep its word. I will believe China when they say we are not stealing the water now, because they have no capacity to steal it. The day they develop the capacity, they will steal it. And that is the whole point. So the Chinese cannot be trusted as the ambassador, as earlier stated, and as Mr. Ranade has earlier stated. So I've got no doubts about that. So we will have to be very careful, sensitize the international opinion. But more importantly, I think what we have to do right from now is monitor the flow of water in the Siang River as soon as it enters India. Now, that has to be, I think, a weekly monitoring, and we've got to maintain those records. That is one. Number two, we need to have proper satellite data on everything which is happening in the Yarlung Tsangpo, right from the time where the river takes off on the western ranges, for the entire 1,000+ kilometers of its length till it enters the Great Bend and then turns south into India. This entire satellite monitoring, I think, has to be, again, on a very, very frequent basis. As of now, I think on a weekly basis. And then that data which is collated over the period of 6 months or 1 year, when it is presented, it will have much greater credibility.
Right.
Frank.
Okay, points taken. We spent quite a bit of time on our opening remarks, so I'm going to ask my panelists to be brief going forward so that we can have closing comments on the program as well. Ambassador, you heard both the panelists before you talking about, how we need to raise the level of discussions probably with our neighboring countries and those who might be impacted as a result of China's ploys, and also probably discuss with China, with Beijing really, and take this particular issue forward. Your thoughts on that?
Look, there are three aspects on which I want to focus. Of course, we must monitor and we must use all technical means at our disposal for that monitoring. I entirely agree with General Saab when he says this. Uh, Second is that I agree with Mr. Ranade that we have to develop an international consensus or regional consensus of countries that are impacted. We must be active in our diplomacy. But the third point that I want to stress is that the Chinese have shown scant regard for regional opinion or international opinion when it comes to their interests. The example of the South China Sea and their conduct there is before us. So, therefore, at the end of the day, we will have to rely on our own resources to handle this. And how my mind is working is that we've got to lay down our red line. We've got to make it quite clear to the Chinese that in matters that this is a matter of national security for us. Waters are intimately linked to national security, and our red lines should not be crossed, which means that if they are actually using a run of the river schemes, then it's fine. To my mind, it's fine as long as our experts tell us that the quantity of water that will be coming into our system, into the Brahmaputra from the Chinese side, is not going to be reduced. But if our experts express doubts, then we must ensure and insist with the Chinese that our experts' opinion is taken fully on board by them in any planning exercise that they do. That is why I said that I do not know whether the mechanisms that we have with China for discussion are sufficient. But all this, to my mind, requires drawing of clear red lines when it comes to this issue.
Since we are here, Mr. Ranade, so let's talk about the mechanism that we have really as far as dealing with trans-border rivers with China. We have the India-China expert level mechanism, or the ELM. So, started way back in 2006. So how has it progressed? What kind of, outcomes have you seen? And do you believe that that is enough?
The meetings have resulted in fairly desultory kind of statements and comments. There hasn't been much progress. Where there was progress was on giving us data on the river flows, and the arbitrariness of the Chinese in that we saw at the time of the Doklam crisis when they stopped giving that data. And I don't know whether they've resumed it now. I understand they have. They claimed that there was some defect in the equipment that they had installed to monitor the data flows. But at the same time, they were sharing that data with Bangladesh. So obviously, it couldn't have been a defect, but that has not resumed. The second thing is, as I mentioned to you, the instance of the Changmu River. And that came up at that meeting. But I think we need to have taken it up much more forcefully. Third, when the Chinese begin talking of a major project, my own view is that we should not be dismissive about it as something which is not attainable or something that will not happen. The Chinese have proven time and again that once they put their mind to something, they'll do it. For example, the Golmud-Lhasa railway line, there were a lot of people who felt that it would not materialize. Today it has. They're building a second one now from Chengdu via Ningxi to Lhasa. And here again, the area near the Great Bend, the Medoc County, which is where the Great Bend is, I'm not the other side of the Great Bend, that is emerging as a hub for Chinese military communications and for such passenger traffic. So it is a very difficult railway line again, but they're going ahead and doing it. They're also building a road connection. So let's not underestimate their capacity. And secondly, their plans call for 17 dams along the Brahmaputra. Now, have they shared the details of all the 17? Have they shared the details of what they're going to do? And to get to Ambassador Karju's point, I've spoken to some of our hydrologists and hydraulic experts who say that even run of the river, it reduces or results in a reduced water flow. Now, if you're building 17 dams, even if they run of the river, it will affect the Brahmaputra.
Right.
And finally, let me say that 200 billion cubic meters of water being taken out of the Brahmaputra or siphoned off calls for a major exercise. And what they're planning is the largest hydropower project, bigger than Three Gorges, which is enough to supply the entire southwest China. Now, if that comes up, or when it comes up, as General Katur said, it would certainly mean a reduced flow of water into the Brahmaputra. The
Right.
logic that there's more rainfall, greater rainfall after the Brahmaputra enters India actually needs to be examined, because if there is considerably reduced water flow in the upper reaches itself, then how much of the Brahmaputra will come in? Will the Brahmaputra itself get diverted or what? These are the questions that come to the mind, at least when I discuss with experts.
Okay. So, General, like the ambassador has pointed out, and, like Mr. Ranade has said as well, clearly China is ambitious about this project and is going to go through with it at some point in time. And clearly diplomacy is something that China doesn't care two hoots about and might not listen to India at the end of the day. So, is it time for us to start using strong arm tactics? What can we use as leverage against China if they go ahead with these plans?
Well, I think the question of leverage as of now remains limited, because I do not think India is in a position as of now to exercise a military option to go on a war with China.
No, not necessarily military. General, not necessarily military, but anything else that we can think about. Yeah.
Right. So what are the other leverages we have got? The other leverages are really economic and political. And the economic leverage, I think, is already being exercised to some extent now, by which we have imposed restrictions on Chinese, goods coming into India. Now, I think we will have to ramp up that pressure, because regardless of what anybody may say, China is not going to change its course. China is going to go ahead with these dam projects, and I'm totally in agreement with my panelists, that with my fellow panelists, that this is a cause of concern. I still maintain, however, that as of now, the situation may change 10 years from now. As of now, the water theft issue is not that great. The bigger issue is what you do when you dam a project. If there are small dams built, and suddenly you release all the water at a particular point of time, you can create real havoc downstream. The environmental havoc which is going to be created because of the silting is huge. So even if without stealing of water, the impact on India is tremendous, which is unacceptable to us. So to that extent, I think we have to be very, very clear as to the red lines. Perhaps we may actually now, instead of looking at the mountains at the red lines, let us start looking at the oceans. Let us start looking at the Malacca Straits and say, okay, you do something here, then we are going to do something down below. And there we are in a position. If you can strengthen your navy and start thinking now as to what we can do actually down below on the Indian Ocean region, that may be a viable option. You will have to ramp up your military, because ultimately hard power will really mean military power. Economically, China is a far bigger power than us. Their economy is far larger than us. So we will not be able to hurt them the way we would like to. But we can hurt them in other ways. And I think on the diplomatic and the political front, we may have to get onto what we call the coalition of the democracies to put pressure on China. And there, the economic pressure which we can put, I think that will be something which will hurt China and force them to go back.
Absolutely. All right. Time to get quick closing comments now from all my panelists with the best way forward, starting first with you, Ambassador.
We have to think of counter leverages. I think international diplomacy is one aspect, but my experience has shown that at the end of the day, it's difficult to rely on international diplomacy again. And therefore, you may have like-minded countries, but how much would they be willing when push comes to shove is always a question mark. So you have to rely on your own self. And there are counter leverages to China that can be developed. They'll take time. They'll require national will. And at the end of the day, a national consensus within India that our political and security class has to develop. It's my fervent hope that they will look at these issues even when they are busy with other things.
Absolutely. Mr. Ranade.
Three quick points, Frank. Firstly, just to put this entire thing in context, I would like to underscore the fact that the Chinese have chosen this time to announce that they are going ahead with this project. The announcement came from the Communist Youth League, Chinese Communist Youth League, from the Medoc County itself, and of course Global Times, so that we could all read it. But they chose this time of heightened India-China tension and when there is a PLA mobilization. The second thing is that the Chinese have been concerned, and this came out in their discussions about the dam, about the diversion of the Brahmaputra, about the safety and security of this project. The fact that they have announced it at this time, when tensions are high, including military tensions between India and China, I think it suggests to my mind that they have, in their mind, made some kind of, or shall I say, made adequate security arrangements. Whether that is so or not is another matter. But I think they would have thought that through. So we need to keep this in mind. Coming to what you said about what countermeasures, I agree that diplomatic efforts alone might not yield the desired results, but they will help in keeping China under sustained pressure if we are able to keep it. International pressure at this time when they have a lot of anti-China sentiment around the world because of COVID. Right. The second, that we have other levers which we can use and should use. That, of course, depends on whether we have the political will and whether the directions are unambiguous about how we should counter what China is doing. Because as General Katoch pointed out, it is something that has to be responded to, and red lines have been crossed or will be crossed. And
General, close the show for us with a quick concluding remark.
Right, Frank. I think I totally agree with the ambassador that simply international opinion may not dissuade the Chinese. But I think it has to be one of the components, regardless of whether they are dissuaded or not. That has to be part of our system. I think internally, I think the biggest problem India faces is not so much what we can do with other countries. It is, I still feel, what we can do amongst ourselves. Because whenever we get onto a course like this, there is so much internal dissension within the country that it makes it very difficult for whichever government is in power to move ahead in a cohesive manner. I think that political consensus being